I stood at the arrivals gate holding a bunch of sunflowers. Wearing the soft blue jacket Garrett once told me he loved seeing me in. My heart was slamming so hard against my ribs that I was certain every stranger in that terminal could hear it. I had waited a long time for this homecoming. Through the empty nights and the unanswered letters and the quiet prayers that he would come back to me whole. I had rehearsed the way I would say his name, the way I would step into his arms the second he cleared those doors. And then a young woman broke out of the crowd ahead of me and ran. She threw herself into his arms like the space already belonged to her, like she had done it 100 times before. "Garrett, you're finally home," she breathed against his neck, her voice bright and shaking with joy. "I have been counting down every single day until I could hold you again. Do you have any idea how long it felt?" I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not even loosen my grip on the flowers in my hands. I just watched him freeze, watched his eyes dart across the crowd in a slow panic, until they landed on me and stopped. That panic told me everything I needed to know in the space of one heartbeat. This was not a stranger's honest mistake or a case of two mixed-up faces. This was a woman who knew exactly whose arms she was running into. I could have crossed that floor and screamed his name until the whole terminal turned to stare. Instead, something cold and clear settled over me, quiet as snow. I looked at him one last time, and I gave him the faintest smile I had in me. Then I turned, sunflowers still in hand, and I walked toward the exit without a single word. He had no idea that the moment I stepped through those doors, his real nightmare was only beginning. I drove home alone with the sunflowers wilting on the passenger seat, and the quiet in that car felt louder than any argument could have been. I thought about the science classroom I walked away from 3 years ago, the one I gave up so I could keep our life running while Garrett rotated in and out on the rigs. And I thought about how easily I had convinced myself that was a fair trade. I had paid every bill on time. I had learned to read his moods through half sentences on a bad satellite call. I had told myself that distance does that to a marriage. It flattens the voice. It shortens the messages. It does not mean the heart underneath has changed. I believed that with everything I had. Garrett walked in almost 2 hours after I got home, and he found me at the kitchen counter like I had been there all along. "Traffic out of the airport was a nightmare," he said, shrugging his duffel bag off his shoulder. "I looked for you at arrivals, and then I figured you'd already headed out." I let the lie sit in the air between us without touching it. I hugged him the way I always did, one hand flat against his back, and I asked how the flight was like. The answer still mattered to me. Every word out of my mouth tasted like sand, but I needed him comfortable. I needed him certain that whatever he thought he'd gotten away with at that gate, he had gotten away with it clean. Later that night, once his breathing had gone slow and even beside me, I slipped out of bed and reached for the tablet we shared for the household accounts, the one neither of us had ever bothered to password separately. My hands were steady. My mind was already 3 steps past grief. I opened the banking app and started scrolling. The transfers were the first thing I found. Small and recurring. Always rounded to numbers that looked harmless on their own. 200 here. 300 there. All of them routed to an account under a name I had never once heard him say out loud. Bryn Castellano. I sat with that name for a long moment before I kept scrolling, because a name alone could still be nothing. A coworker. A favor. A mistake in the memo line. Then I found the hotel charges on our shared card. 4 of them over the last year. Every single one dated to a weekend he had told me he was staying out on the platform for a double shift. The dates lined up with his own words so exactly that it stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like architecture. Something built on purpose and maintained with care. The messages were still sitting in our old shared photo backup, the one we set up years ago to save pictures of the house we were renovating, and I almost didn't think to check it. I wish I hadn't. There they were. Months of them. Easy and familiar in a way that told me this had not started last week. I have been counting down every rotation just to see you. One of them read, and I recognized the rhythm of it immediately. The same breathless cadence I had heard shouted across an airport terminal less than 12 hours earlier. That was when the second name surfaced, half buried in a message where Bryn mentioned canceling plans with her fiancé to make room for Garrett instead. A man named Marcus. Someone she was supposedly building a wedding with while she was quietly building this. I sat back from the screen and let that settle. This was not a woman who had simply crossed a line with my husband. This was a woman running two men at once. And somewhere out on a different platform in the Gulf. A man named Marcus had no idea his own homecoming was being built on the same kind of lie mine had just been. Whatever I decided to do next could not only be about Garrett anymore. I spent the next few days moving through our house like nothing had cracked open underneath it. Cooking dinner, folding his laundry, letting him talk about the crew he'd left behind on the platform while I nodded in the right places. Every hour I stayed quiet felt like a brick laid down on purpose. I was not protecting him. I was building something, and I needed him comfortable enough to never notice the foundation shifting under his feet. By the end of that week, I had made an appointment I told no one about, not even my sister, and I drove myself to a small office off Westheimer to sit across from a family law attorney named Regina Alvarez. Regina read through the printouts I brought her without much reaction. The transfers, the hotel dates, the messages. And when she finally looked up, she asked me one question first. Is all of this money coming out of an account you both share? I told her yes. The same account we'd used for 12 years. Mortgage and groceries and everything else. She set the pages down flat on her desk and told me that in Texas, everything acquired during the marriage counts as community property, which means Garrett didn't just cheat. He spent money that was half mine to fund it. That can rise to what we call fraud on the community, she said. And if we can show a pattern like this, a judge can award you a larger share of what's left to make up for what he gave away. I asked her what I needed to do next, and she was direct about it. Don't confront him yet. Keep pulling records from anything you both have equal access to. The joint account, the shared cloud. Nothing password protected that isn't already yours to open. Open a separate account in your name only and start moving your own paycheck into it. She looked at me steadily and added that the goal wasn't to hurt him. It was to make sure that when the truth came out, I would already be standing on solid ground. I left her office that afternoon with a folder of instructions and a strange, steady, calm, settling into my chest. The kind that comes from finally having a plan. With Regina's instructions in hand, I started following the money further than I'd meant to. Using the same shared cloud account, I found an old thread between Garrett and a woman I recognized from years back. A friend of his cousin who still worked the front desk at the crew hotel out near the docks. And I asked her, carefully, whether she remembered seeing Garrett around lately. She didn't hesitate. She said Bryn had been picking up extra shifts at that same hotel for over a year. The one where crews stay before and after rotation. And that half the guys on that dock joked about how she always seemed to know everyone's schedule before they did. That detail alone told me this wasn't an accident of proximity. She had built herself a vantage point. What I learned next didn't excuse Bryn, but it did explain her. A cousin of Garrett's mentioned, almost in passing, that Bryn's mother had been buried under medical debt the year before. The kind that swallows a paycheck whole, and that Bryn had been quietly drowning in it since. It didn't make what she'd done right. It just meant she wasn't some flat, cartoon villain waiting in the wings. She was a woman who had found two men willing to hand her money and told each one a different lie to keep them both paying. Garrett thought he was starting a new life. Marcus thought he was building one. Neither of them knew he was funding the same woman's escape from a hole neither of them had dug. Sitting with that, I understood something I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. Garrett had betrayed me. But in his own way, he was also being used. Chasing a version of Bryn that only existed in the version of the story she'd built for him. That didn't earn him my forgiveness. It just meant the truth I was holding didn't only belong to me anymore. And the man out on that platform who still thought he was engaged deserved to hear it before anyone else did. I got Marcus's number from the same front desk friend who'd first mentioned Bryn's schedule, and I sat with it for 2 full days before I finally called. I didn't want to be the voice that blew up a man's life over the phone, but I also knew that every day I waited was another day he spent planning a future that had already been hollowed out from the inside. When he picked up, I kept my voice steady and told him straight away that I wasn't calling to start trouble, that I had documents he was going to want to see, and that they involved Bryn. There was a pause on his end long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, quiet and flat, "What kind of documents?" I told him everything in order. The transfers, the hotel charges, the messages. And I made sure he understood I wasn't guessing at any of it. That every piece came straight from accounts and threads that weren't mine to keep secret once I'd found them. "I'm not asking you to believe me over her," I said. "I'm asking you to look at this yourself and decide what it means." I heard him breathing on the other end, slow and controlled, the sound of a man forcing himself not to say something he'd regret. "Send it," he finally said. "All of it. Don't leave anything out." I sent the files that night and didn't hear back for almost 24 hours. When he did call again, his voice had gone somewhere colder and steadier than before. "I confronted her an hour ago," he said. "She didn't deny the money. She just said it didn't mean what it looked like." I asked him what he was going to do. "It's over," he said. "I already told her to get her things out by Friday." There was no shake left in his voice by then. Just the flat certainty of a man who had already made his decision and wasn't interested in revisiting it. 3 weeks after that airport, I sat Garrett down at our kitchen table and set the folder in front of him without a word of preamble. I watched the color drain out of his face as he opened it, page by page. The transfers first, then the hotel charges, then the messages he clearly recognized on sight. "Bridget, I can explain," he started, his voice already cracking around the edges. "You had 14 months of calls and letters to explain," I said. "Every single night, I stayed up wondering if you were safe. You chose silence then. So now I choose it too." He tried to argue that it wasn't what it looked like, but I just watched him say it, because evidence doesn't lie the way people do, and he had nothing left to set against it. Word moved faster than either of us expected. By the end of that same week, Marcus had already told 2 guys on his crew why the wedding was off. And out at the docks where everyone rotates through the same hotel and the same handful of bars. That kind of story doesn't stay contained for long. A man Garrett used to supervise pulled him aside on his next check-in and told him flat out that nobody on that crew trusted a supervisor who couldn't be trusted at home. And within days, there was open talk of moving him off lead on the next rotation. Regina filed for divorce that same week, citing the fraud on the community claim with every transfer and hotel charge attached as exhibits. And she told me plainly that a judge would likely award me a larger share of what remained to offset what Garrett had spent funding Bryn. Bryn, for her part, lost both men inside of a month. No fiancé, no fallback, and no more free room to run whatever she'd been running out of that hotel. Every version of the life Garrett thought he was building in secret collapsed at almost the exact same speed it took him to build it. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday morning in a courthouse downtown, and I signed the last page expecting to feel something sharp, some flicker of triumph after everything it took to get there. What I felt instead was relief, plain and quiet, the kind that settles into your shoulders before you even notice the weight is gone. Garrett called twice after that. I let both go to voicemail and never listened to either one. Whatever he needed to say, I had already heard enough of his voice explaining things across that kitchen table. I moved out to the coast that same spring, close enough to smell the Gulf from my porch, and I went back to teaching. This time running a marine science program at a community center for kids who had never stood close enough to the water to really look at it. My sister Colleen helped me carry boxes into that new place. And she didn't say a single word about Garrett the whole afternoon. She just handed me another box and let the moving keep both our hands busy. Word reached me eventually about the rest of them, the way news does in small circles. Garrett was still trying to rebuild a reputation that didn't come back easy on a crew where trust is the only currency that matters. Bryn had disappeared from that hotel altogether, and nobody seemed to know or care where she'd landed. Marcus, from what I heard, was doing fine. Steady. Moving forward the way people do once the weight finally lifts. As for me, I found something out on that coast I hadn't felt in years. Not victory. Just peace. The kind that comes from finally building a life that belongs only to me. If you're listening to this tonight, I hope you know that walking away quietly was never weakness. It was the beginning of everything that came after. I found my footing again out here by the water. And some mornings I still can't believe how far I've come from that airport floor.